I'm Roberta Grimes. We tend to think of spirituality as just personal fluff. But for all of us to grow spiritually now is essential if we are ever to solve America's biggest problems. And only when we have our own house in order can we start to work on solving the world's problems. Spiritual growth is actually simple. It's nothing more complicated than learning how to ever more perfectly love. But as simple as it is, we are realizing now that it empowers the human mind in remarkable ways. Spiritual growth is like releasing a bubble underwater. Once you remove all the obstacles to love, your mind naturally rises toward the light. In the Fun of Growing Forever, I share with you what I think is the easiest course in spiritual growth. It's the non-religious teachings of Jesus, and of course, since it's Jesus, even Christians can use it. I've made a companion video that better explains how easy these teachings are to use and how much they can improve your life. So spiritual growth turns out to be easy. And when we no longer think from fear and scarcity, but instead we are always thinking from love, we are able to do some amazing things. I'm going to give you an example of how much more easily we can solve this nation's problems when we always think from love and not from fear. America is in its worst shape since the Civil War. The reasons for our malaise are many, but they come down to three core problems that to some extent feed on one another. Each of these difficulties seems so complex and entrenched as to be insoluble. Only when we think from love can we spot the one solution that might well address them all. Here are what I consider to be the three causes of most of America's domestic problems. First, even 150 years past legal emancipation, most of the descendants of American slavery still lead debased and hopeless lives. Just look at these statistics. Half of young black children live in poverty. 2/3 of black children are in single-parent homes, and 40% of black men are in prison or are ex-offenders. Incredibly, black people make up half of our homicide victims. Nearly all their murderers are black as well. 150 years past emancipation, our racial problems actually are getting worse. Our second core problem is that America's federal spending deficits are bankrupting us. Our $10 trillion national debt doubled to $20 trillion over just the past decade. And if we continue to run annual spending deficits in the $500 billion range, then our federal debt will rise to an incredible $30 trillion over just the decade to come. What cannot go on forever won't. Some estimates suggest that within 20 years, every bit of our federal tax revenues will be needed just to pay interest on our debt. So this problem will have to be fixed, and the longer we wait, the harder that day of reckoning will be on the most vulnerable among us. We've got to address our spending soon, but because of our third core domestic problem, coming together to solve these first two problems looks to be impossible. America's political divide is worse now than it ever has been. We cannot agree on anything. We all want a safe and prosperous nation where everyone has a fair chance to rise, but for the sake of the political game, we've got to demonize and destroy the other side. And until we stop battling one another over trivial political differences, we never will be able to come together well enough to address our major problems. Our current paralyzed state as a nation testifies to the fact that for so long as we continue to think from fear, no solution to any of these problems will be possible. But unless we can solve all three, and soon, what Abraham Lincoln called our experiment in government of the people, by the people, and for the people is going to fail. The nation that many of our presidents have referred to as the last best hope of earth will collapse. The fact that we face three big problems at once does somewhat limit our options. Whatever we do must tread a careful political, fiscal, and social line. So for at least the past 2 decades, Congress has been paralyzed into doing Nothing. Which of course is the worst course we can take. What is needed is a dramatic breakthrough that improves the lot of slavery's descendants, while it also relieves our fiscal situation and it gives our nation an uplifting reason to rally around a great shared project. In the fun of living together, Kelly Glover and I approach our racial problem with a love-based analysis that seeks to understand its cause, first of all. It is our contention that this country's racial problems stem from the fact that 150 years ago we neglected to finish emancipating the slaves. Yes, we abolished slavery, but then instead of educating and empowering the newly freed slaves and integrating them into American life, we subjected them and their descendants to a century of Jim Crow debasement, and another 50 years of federally enforced fiscal bondage at children reared in one-parent homes. By now we have hardened in the minds of Americans of every shade the erroneous notions that the races are different, that darker skin connotes inferiority, and that we can never be one people. This long tale of slavery, its shame and guilt, and the othering of those who don't share our skin shade will never end unless we take decisive action. Because of slavery's long tail, as many as 10% of Americans are either underemployed or outright takers now, which of course makes our spending deficit still worse. And our ineffectual efforts to throw money at our racial problems have been deepening our political divide, with each party blaming the other for the sorry state of so many black people. There's an associated video for the fun of living together. There, Kelly and I propose a number of steps that would need the help of many Americans to educate and empower all descendants of slavery and to give their children the finest educations. Sounds simple, right? But the results would be dramatic. By turning 10% of the youngest Americans, who otherwise might have been likely takers, into productive and tax-paying members of society who won't end up in prison or on welfare, and by encouraging their parents to learn and work and start businesses, we will be dramatically cutting spending and increasing tax revenues over the next few decades. And by giving all Americans a great shared project that will do wonders for the descendants of slavery, we can come together as a nation as we haven't come together since the Second World War. If Americans will abandon party ideologies in favor of a love-based attempt to do what's best for everyone, this really can be our new beginning. We can start today to build a healthy and prosperous nation that serves all its citizens. Both the red team and the blue team can win this one. I've given you just one example of what will be possible for this country once we are thinking only from love and not from fear. Every problem America has can be solved. All we've got to do is find ways to solve our problems that will bless and support all Americans. And once we have come together as a nation, we can begin the love-based work of healing all the world. There's no limit to the good we can do together, as long as we are happy to share the credit. Thank you for listening.